The Barents Sea, Christmas, 1943. A place where the winter sun never rises. Temperatures are well below freezing. 30-foot waves punish the surface, and somewhere in that perpetual darkness, a threat is lurking. The Scharnhorst. With the Tirpitz neutralized, she was the last lone wolf, the final major asset of the Kriegsmarine in these waters. She wasn't just sorting to hunt convoys, she was steaming directly into a trap, set in the coldest waters on Earth. This brings us to late 1943. The Arctic convoys had resumed in earnest, and Grand Admiral Dönitz had secured permission to attack them. Once authorized, the targets were identified. Convoy JW-55B, bound for Russia, and RA-55A on its return leg home. The Luftwaffe located JW-55B on December 22nd. By Christmas Day, the Scharnhorst was ordered to intercept under the command of Rear Admiral Erich Bay. Screening these slow merchantmen was a thin escort force. 5 German Narvik-class destroyers were set against a layered British defence. But in these storm-tossed waters, tonnage mattered more than numbers. The Scharnhorst was built to brush aside destroyers with ease. If the German capital ship broke into the convoy lanes, it wouldn't be a battle, it would be a slaughter. Even with 8 Home Fleet destroyers nearby as backup, a reasonable force, the Scharnhorst and her consorts possessed the firepower to engage them confidently. JW-55B was naturally the higher value target, heavy with supplies bound for Russia, whereas RA-55A consisted mostly of empty vessels returning to Britain. However, with the German heavy units in Norway largely idle, the Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet, Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, anticipated an attack. He began laying a trap. He was certain the Germans would strike an Arctic convoy sooner or later. With the previous convoy passing safely, he became convinced the Germans would take the bait offered by J-West 55B. Intelligence reports, Norwegian resistance sightings, and confirmation that the convoy was being shadowed prompted him to sail. He took his flagship, the King George V class battleship HMS Duke of York, the cruiser HMS Jamaica, and 4 S-class destroyers, 3 British, and the Stord, manned by a Norwegian crew. Converging from the opposite direction was the cruiser covering force, consisting of the heavy cruiser HMS Norfolk and the light cruisers HMS Sheffield and HMS Belfast. Admiral Fraser knew he had only one chance. The Scharnhorst was faster than his flagship. If detected early, the German raider would simply run. Fraser's plan was a gamble, a silent approach. He ordered total radio silence and passive radar only, using the polar darkness to mask the approach of the 35,000-ton Duke of York. He intended to close to 12,000 yards, point-blank range for capital ships, before illuminating the target and opening fire. He knew speed was his enemy. The Scharnhorst could outrun the Duke of York. By engaging at such close quarters, undetected, he hoped to ensure that even if the Scharnhorst turned to flee, she would remain within the effective killing zone of the Duke of York's guns for as long as possible. En route to the convoy, Fraser's force rehearsed this specific scenario, with the cruiser Jamaica playing the role of the Scharnhorst. As Christmas approached, the weather deteriorated significantly, and convoy JW-55B entered the critical danger zone. By December 26th, Admiral Bay had entered the same patch of rough sea as the convoys, The stage was set. Sometime in the early hours, Admiral Bay became convinced he had overshot the convoy. He detached his destroyers, ordering them to spread out and sweep astern to relocate the target. Meanwhile, Admiral Fraser diverted RA-55A northward, clear of the impending engagement. He ordered 4 of its escort destroyers to detach and reinforce his battle group, reasoning that while the Germans were hunting JW-55B, there was no intelligence suggesting a threat to the returning convoy. Conditions were atrocious. The low freeboard and straight bow of the Duke of York meant she was taking heavy seas over her forward decks, much of which froze instantly. In contrast, the Scharnhorst, with her high, flared Atlantic bow, was handling the rough seas somewhat better. Then, aboard HMS Belfast, a single blip appeared on the radar screen. Range 14 miles. Unfortunately for the Scharnhorst, by this stage of the war, British radar technology was superior in both power and range. The German ship was flying blind to the British presence. The lookouts on HMS Sheffield caught the silhouette of a massive vessel, ghostly through the snow, sleet and fog, roughly 7 miles out. The darkness was torn apart by a single, brilliant white flare arcing across the sky as Belfast fired a star shell to illuminate the sector. On HMS Belfast and Sheffield, the turrets roared, spitting long tongues of flame that rent the Arctic night. But in the blinding snow squalls, the first salvos merely churned up the black water. Misses. HMS Norfolk was different. When her 8-inch battery opened up, the concussion shook the entire frame. The air reeked of cordite. 6 shells tore through the wind. This time, there was no splash, only the sound of metal grinding on metal. 3 hits, 3 direct blows to the German Leviathan. The Scharnhorst shuddered. Then, a critical blow. A lucky hit from Norfolk completely destroyed the Scharnhorst's forward radar. In a modern naval engagement, this was worse than death. It was blindness. While the British ships could see the Scharnhorst clearly on their radar screens, the German ship plunged into electronic darkness. Around this time, Admiral Bay likely abandoned the idea of attacking the convoy with the Scharnhorst. He realized he was being shadowed and was effectively drawing the British cruisers away from the merchant ships. He signaled his own destroyers, vectoring them toward where he estimated the convoy to be. He ordered them to attack, hoping to draw the British cruisers and their destroyer escorts far enough away to clear a firing lane for his own light forces. Unfortunately for Bay, the convoy coordinates he transmitted were incorrect. Although the German destroyers managed to slip past the combined British forces in the area, they failed to locate the merchant ships. However, the cruisers were still dogging his wake. Though over the next few hours, both Sheffield and Norfolk began suffering from intermittent engine trouble, forcing them to lag behind. In theory, this left Belfast alone against the Scharnhorst. But with the German ship's forward radar disabled, long-range gunnery was difficult and inaccurate. Belfast was content to remain at range, acting as a spotter, broadcasting the target's location to the fleet rather than closing in to attempt a one-on-one duel. Using the data fed by Belfast, the Duke of York and her escorts maneuvered to cut across the Scharnhorst's bow. By this time, Belfast reported that the Duke of York's battle group was appearing on her radar at a range of roughly 40,000 yards. The Duke of York also acquired Belfast on sensors, and ordered the light cruiser to illuminate the target. Belfast complied 7 minutes later. Suddenly, the Scharnhorst found herself exposed, lit up by magnesium flares hanging in the sky as Belfast fired a rapid succession of star shells over the sector. The Duke of York's own radar picked up the Scharnhorst closing at 45,500 yards, the large radar cross-section of the German capital ship providing a clear return. The main battery directors began tracking for a firing solution. The Duke of York's escorting destroyers also maneuvered to take up station for a torpedo attack, while HMS Jamaica trailed the flagship at a distance. Sticking to his plan, Fraser allowed the Scharnhorst to close the distance, rather than opening fire immediately. The Scharnhorst likely believed she was only being harassed by Belfast, as her forward radar remained non-operational, leaving her blind to what lay ahead. However, the next salvo from the Duke of York was not a harmless star shell. For the crew of the Scharnhorst, the tactical situation shifted instantly. One moment they were hunting in the dark, the next, the sky was as bright as day. Before they could process the change, the roar of the Duke of York tore through the air. There was no warning shot. Fraser's patience paid off. On the very first salvo, a 14-inch armor-piercing shell weighing nearly 1,600 pounds slammed home. It tore through the Scharnhorst's armor belt and detonated deep within the engineering spaces, destroying boiler room number 1. The ship's speed plummeted to 10 knots. A 14-inch shell inside the hull meant boiler pressure dropped to 0. But deep in the bowels of the ship, a different kind of battle was underway. This wasn't abstract hell, it was brutal physics. Superheated steam vented from ruptured lines at 750 degrees Fahrenheit. It was invisible, and it could boil a man alive instantly upon contact. In that lethal fog, the German engineers did not flee. They wrapped themselves in wet rags, crawled across scalding deck plates, and used their bare hands to manually lock jammed valves and reroute the steam lines. They traded flesh for speed, and that desperate effort worked. The massive ship shuddered, and the knot meter began to climb again, narrowly allowing her to pull away from the Duke of York. Hits from the Duke of York or Jamaica had pulverized the aircraft hangar as the ship executed a turn, only to find Belfast and Norfolk approaching from the opposite direction. Consequently, the Scharnhorst pushed her engines to maximum and attempted to run due east. The Duke of York followed, altering course slightly to comb the tracks in case the Scharnhorst had fired torpedoes during her turn. By this point, the Scharnhorst was fully committed to her easterly course, with the Duke of York and Jamaica pouring fire into her wake as the German ship utilized every pound of steam pressure in a bid to escape. Belfast and Norfolk lobbed shells from the north, hoping to score a lucky hit. Meanwhile, the Duke of York's destroyer escorts, Savage, Saumarez, Scorpion, and Stored, were slowly creeping up on the Scharnhorst. Their relative closing speed was agonizingly slow, partly due to the heavy seas, and partly because the damaged Scharnhorst was now nearly as fast as they were. The Scharnhorst also began to return fire, unleashing a full broadside. This surprised the British, who believed the forward turrets had been disabled. It appeared that Turret Bruno, the forward main battery, had been brought back online, at least intermittently, firing sporadically, though not with the same rate of fire as Turret Caesar, mounted aft. The ship was weaving along her course, turning to unmask her guns for a 2-turret broadside, then angling back to present the narrowest possible profile to the Duke of York. She scored no direct hits, but several near misses, and 11-inch shell splinters severed radio cables, radar linkages, and fire control circuits. Radar systems on both sides were proving fragile in this engagement. 3 sets on 3 separate ships were now disabled by relatively minor shock damage or splinters. The fate of the tracking capability now rested on one man, Lieutenant H.R.K. Bates. When the radar screen went blank, Bates did the extraordinary. He climbed the 100-foot mast, swaying violently in the gale. The wind at that altitude was strong enough to blow a man into the freezing sea. To splice the severed antenna cable, Bates had to remove his gloves. Bare flesh met frozen metal. His fingers numbed and bled, but he did not let go. When the radar screen in the plot room flickered back to life, it wasn't just technology working. It was bought with Bates's blood. At this moment, the tactical situation briefly improved for the Scharnhorst. Her speed was opening the range, and Jamaica ceased fire as the German ship pulled beyond the effective reach of her guns. Furthermore, her own return fire, initially ragged, was becoming faster and more accurate. Crucially, she was still outrunning the pursuing destroyers, meaning there were no torpedoes in the water to evade. Then the tide turned. A 14-inch shell from the Duke of York arrived from long range, piercing the ship's armor and rupturing a boiler room. This temporarily dropped her speed to 10 knots. Although frantic damage control would soon restore her to 22 knots, the delay was fatal. Limited to that speed, it was clear the Scharnhorst could no longer outrun her attackers. The destroyers began to close in, rapidly. At 18:20 hours, Admiral Bay knew time had run out. Surrounded, engines crippled, ammunition running low. He sent a radio message that would enter Kriegsmarine history, not as a plea for help, but as a pre-written obituary. To the Führer, we shall fight to the last shell. After that transmission, the Scharnhorst ceased to be a ship. She became a fortress under siege. As the destroyers Savage and Saumarez closed to launch torpedoes, they were met by a relatively heavy barrage from the Scharnhorst's secondary armament. Although forced to take evasive action, neither ship was hit, and the incoming fire was less intense than anticipated. Unfortunately, by turning to engage Savage and Saumarez, the ship exposed her flank to Scorpion and stalled. The Scharnhorst maneuvered to comb the tracks, turning parallel to the torpedoes, but still took 1 hit out of the 8 launched. Her misfortune compounded. This turn placed her directly back in the sights of Savage and Saumarez, now rushing out from under the secondary gunfire to launch their own spreads. The result was devastating. 3 torpedoes struck the Scharnhorst on her port side. In exchange, Saumarez finally took a hit from the German secondary guns. All destroyers also engaged in a fierce gunnery duel with the Scharnhorst, attempting to suppress those same secondary weapons. One of the torpedoes struck near a boiler room, flooding the compartment and damaging a propeller shaft. The Scharnhorst's maximum speed instantly plummeted to 10 knots, once again. German damage control teams worked furiously, and once more, the ship's speed crept back up to between 20 and 22 knots. However, the cumulative damage was too great. From this point on, the Scharnhorst's speed began a gradual, irreversible decline for the remainder of the engagement. But the most audacious act of the night belonged to the small Norwegian destroyer HMNoS Stord. Carrying the vengeance of an occupied nation, Captain Skule Storheil issued a near suicidal order. "Steer straight for her." The Stord charged the Scharnhorst like an arrow. 1,000 yards, 800 yards, 400 yards. The range was so close that the German gunners could not depress their barrels low enough to return fire. In that moment, the tiny Norwegian ship looked the giant in the eye and delivered the killing blow. The captain of the Duke of York would later remark, "I have never seen a more gallant action in all my life." At this proximity, Stord's gunners pumped 4.7-inch shells continuously into the Scharnhorst's superstructure, while launching torpedoes at a range where missing was impossible. The Norwegian ferocity left even the British sailors in awe. German crewmen described the sensation as being locked in a pitch-black room with a knife-wielding killer. You don't know where he is. You only see the flash when he pulls the trigger, followed by the explosion. This reduced the Scharnhorst's return fire to aiming solely at the brief, obscured muzzle flashes that lit the night, whenever the British ships fired salvos of their own. The Scharnhorst turned south-southeast, pulling away from the British cruisers at full speed, or at least what passed for full speed in this weather, for about half an hour. Thanks to her high Atlantic bow and greater displacement, she was physically outpacing the cruisers. Belfast and Sheffield had ceased fire some time ago, and now Norfolk fell silent as the range continued to open. The maneuver wasn't a full retreat. The Scharnhorst had a second radar mounted aft. However, this unit had limited arcs, and part of the turn was intended to unmask this radar, giving the Scharnhorst a glimmer of hope for accurate fire, though she failed to score any hits. Just because the Scharnhorst had withdrawn didn't mean she had abandoned the mission. At this point, having shaken the British cruisers, the ship turned northeast, attempting to circle around them and leverage her superior speed. Yet, the Scharnhorst remained a blip on the cruiser's radar. Realizing what the German ship was attempting, they decided to cut the corner, aiming to intercept her before she reached the convoy, leveraging their position closer to the transports to negate the need to travel in a wide arc. This meant, however, that the cruisers lost contact with the Scharnhorst as the range extended. They could only hope that their calculated position would prove correct. Belfast, Norfolk and Sheffield rendezvoused with 4 destroyers from Convoy R A-55A, ordered to detach earlier that day to support the fleet action. These were Musketeer, Matchless, Opportune and Virago. All of them would play a pivotal role in the action to come. About 5 minutes later, the combined force made radar contact with Convoy J W-55B, and the destroyers deployed as a screen for the cruisers as they began to escort it from the front. For the past 25 minutes, the cruisers had held sporadic radar contacts at varying ranges. But by this time, Belfast held a solid return at over 30,000 yards. It was a large ship, approaching from the south. Unsurprisingly, the crews went to action stations, preparing to engage the Scharnhorst once again. The Scharnhorst appeared in sight once more, and the British cruisers opened fire, with the initial range at 11,000 yards. Simultaneously, the 4 destroyers were ordered to launch a torpedo attack. However, weather conditions were so severe that the destroyers were forced to reduce speed, making it impossible to effectively close the distance on the Scharnhorst. Even so, Musketeer opened fire at the very close range of 7,000 yards, maintaining the barrage for roughly 15 minutes. Although the British cruisers and possibly Musketeer scored several hits during the 20-minute exchange, they achieved little against the heavy armor of the German battleship. However, midway through the engagement, an 11-inch shell slammed into Norfolk, piercing the barbette of the aft turret and disabling it. A second shell struck amidships, knocking out Norfolk's radar. This meant not only was Norfolk's main battery degraded, reducing her ability to engage the Scharnhorst, but her ability to track the target was also significantly impaired. A main battery salvo also straddled Sheffield. Shrapnel and splinters pierced the hull, causing multiple minor damages that would plague Sheffield later in the battle. The Scharnhorst did not press the attack. Despite her superior firepower, she turned away, increased speed, and attempted to shake her pursuers in the mist. But the British refused to let go. The seas began to calm slightly. That was all the cruisers needed. Sheffield and Belfast pushed their engines to the limit, hitting 28 knots. Their bows sliced through the water, hanging on to the faint radar signature of the German ship ahead. The hunt entered a new phase, a deadly race through the ice floes. The cruisers maintained a tracking distance of about 14,000 yards, shadowing the Scharnhorst, with the destroyers trailing slightly behind. Firing from both sides ceased around 12:41. Neither side could visually acquire the other in the gloom, and the range had opened to a point where spotting shell splashes was nearly impossible in these conditions. During the destroyer attack, the Duke of York and Jamaica had turned in, closing the range as quickly as possible. Now, as the chaotic spray of that engagement settled, both ships opened fire again, at a range of just over 10,000 yards. To the north, Norfolk and Belfast arrived, with Sheffield trailing some distance behind. Norfolk's radar remained inoperative. After just 2 salvos, she ceased fire, unable to accurately range the target in the gloom. Meanwhile, Belfast continued to hammer the target with her 6-inch battery, all 3 firing ships now benefiting from radar control. With the range closing to point blank, the Scharnhorst was reduced to a burning wreck of twisted metal and explosions within 5 minutes. Despite this, what remained of her main armament and her rapidly diminishing secondary battery continued to engage the Duke of York and Jamaica as best they could. Jamaica and Belfast, joined by the 4 destroyers from convoy RA-55A, closed in and launched dozens of torpedoes toward the crippled ship. By this point, sporadic ammunition explosions and spreading fires had effectively destroyed her remaining combat capability. The cruisers claimed at least 3 torpedo hits, and the destroyers up to 7. Post-battle analysis, however, suggests a total of 5 hits was likely the accurate figure. Reports from this period are confused, complicated by the fact that the Scharnhorst was listing heavily to starboard, and most of the crew were preparing to abandon ship. However, one survivor later confirmed to the British that 3 rapid impacts were felt on that side, suggesting multiple hits from a single torpedo spread. Having fired torpedoes from one side, Belfast circled around to attack from the other, only to find that the Scharnhorst was obscured by a chaotic mix of smoke, fog, snow, and steam, lit from within by the dull red and orange glow of the burning hull. Consequently, Belfast held fire. The end of the Scharnhorst was a scene of industrial horror. As the ship capsized, her massive turbines continued to roar. Survivors treading water in the freezing swell witnessed a haunting sight. The Scharnhorst's giant screws still spinning in the air, thrashing against the snowy night before dragging the hull and 1,968 men into the depths. Only 36 men were pulled from the water. In the sub-zero Arctic cold, survival was measured in minutes. As the fires were extinguished by the sea, the ocean's darkness swallowed everything. The sinking was felt and heard aboard the British ships, though the smoke and glare of the fires meant the final plunge went largely unseen. Tragically, in her death throes, the Scharnhorst took the vast majority of her 1,968-man crew down with her. Several hundred had managed to escape the ship, but in the freezing Arctic waters and poor visibility, most perished before help arrived. By the time British ships approached with scramble nets and ropes, only 36 remained alive. No officers survived. The highest-ranking prisoner was an acting petty officer. The Battle of the North Cape was not just the death of a ship. It marked the end of the era of visual gunnery. The Scharnhorst fought with a courage and resilience that commanded Admiral Fraser's respect, but she was not defeated by superior firepower alone. She lost because she was blind. In the Arctic night, radar proved its absolute supremacy. He who sees first wins. The Duke of York did not just sink the Scharnhorst. She fired the opening salvo of a new age of electronic warfare. Finally, there remains the remarkable endurance of the Scharnhorst herself. Surrounded, trapped, and outnumbered, she fulfilled Admiral Bay's promise. She fought to the last shell. Later that evening, Admiral Fraser addressed his officers with a statement that serves as the epitaph for the Scharnhorst. Gentlemen, the battle against the Scharnhorst has ended in victory for us. I hope that if any of you are ever called upon to lead a ship into action against an opponent many times superior, you will command your ship as gallantly as the Scharnhorst was commanded today. Today, HMS Belfast rests peacefully on the River Thames, a museum ship in the heart of bustling London. But if you ever lay a hand on her cold steel armour, remember that Christmas night in 1943. A night where the only light came not from the stars, but from lethal magnesium flares. A night where radar conquered courage. The Scharnhorst and her crew fought to the last shell, just as they promised. They lie forever at the bottom of the freezing Barents Sea, a brutal reminder that while technology may change the rules of war, the cost is always paid in flesh and blood. In just 3 minutes of combat, HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, detonated in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, leaving only 3 survivors out of 1,418 sailors. The culprit? A single German battleship on her maiden mission. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, his face flushed with rage, issued a simple 6-word order: sink the Bismarck at all costs. Within hours, the Royal Navy mobilized the largest manhunt in naval history. 6 battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers, all chasing a single target. Displacing over 50,000 tons, her 8 15-inch guns outranged any British pursuer. Her advanced radar arrays spotted aircraft before they could spot her, and her compartment design made her seemingly unsinkable. Bismarck raced toward the safety of occupied France, with the world's largest navy snapping at her heels. But a single small wound betrayed the pride of the Kriegsmarine, a long slick of oil trailing behind her. And British aircraft were closing in. The crown jewel of the Third Reich. February 14th, 1939. A cold wind swept across the Elbe River as workers, officers and dignitaries gathered along the slipways at Blom and Voss in Hamburg. At the center of the pageantry lay the unfinished hull of Germany's newest battleship, the Bismarck, poised to launch for the first time after nearly 3 years of construction. Dorothee von Löwenfeld, granddaughter of Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor for whom the ship was named, stepped forward to smash a bottle of champagne against the bow and officially christen the vessel. Adolf Hitler himself addressed the crowd, marking the debut of this new symbol of German power. Though Bismarck was presented to the world as a design that adhered to treaties, when fully loaded, she displaced over 50,000 tons, far exceeding the 35,000-ton limit. Her dimensions matched her ambition. 823 feet long, a beam of 121 feet, and a range of over 10,000 nautical miles. When finally commissioned in August 1940, Captain Ernst Lindemann, a career officer with a reputation for discipline and loyalty, assumed command of Bismarck and her crew of over 2,200 men. Though Hitler and the Kriegsmarine needed her operational quickly, sea trials revealed a troubling flaw. Bismarck was nearly impossible to steer using her engines alone. Operation Rheinübung, a bold gamble. By the time Bismarck was finally ready for war in mid-1941, Germany's broader Atlantic strategy was faltering. The battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were both damaged and trapped in Brest, while Tirpitz, Bismarck's nearly identical sister ship, was still being fitted out in Wilhelmshaven. Crucially, the Kriegsmarine could not match the Royal Navy in an open fleet battle, forcing Grand Admiral Erich Raeder to push for limited commerce raiding. Bismarck's first mission, Operation Rheinübung, was designed around that strategy. The German jewel would break out into the Atlantic, avoid direct engagement with capital ships, link up with pre-positioned supply vessels, and begin decimating Allied convoys with impunity. With the rest of the fleet out of action, the operation was no longer a show of force, but a bold gamble. Finally, on May 18, 1941, Bismarck slipped out of Gortenhafen under a grey Baltic sky, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen and a trio of destroyers. Overseeing it all was Admiral Gunther Lütjens. The breakout plan hinged on slipping past British strength undetected. The English Channel was impossible. It was too narrow, too exposed, and under constant surveillance. This left only the northern route, hugging the coast of neutral Norway, where Bismarck could use bad weather and the lingering twilight of spring to mask her movements. From there, the objective was to traverse the Denmark Strait, one of the last gaps in Allied air and naval coverage, and break into the open Atlantic. Detected, and the chase begins. On the 20th, the squadron passed through the Kattegat, but they did not go unnoticed. Around noon, the Swedish cruiser Gotland spotted the German force and flashed a signal up the chain of command. By evening, that report had reached London. Admiral Lütjens quickly relayed this development to German Naval Command, yet he maintained his protocol and refused to enforce total radio silence, even during a mission of such sensitivity. The next day, RAF pilot Michael Suckling, alone in his Spitfire at 26,000 feet, flew directly over the German squadron and captured high-altitude reconnaissance photos of Bismarck and Prinz Eugen. With visual confirmation in hand, Admiral John Tovey placed the home fleet on high alert. Hood, Prince of Wales, and 6 destroyers were ordered to intercept from Iceland. As the sun set that evening and the German squadron departed Bergen, Prinz Eugen topped off her fuel tanks. Whether due to time constraints, misinformation, or hubris, Admiral Lutyens chose to proceed without refueling his flagship. A decision he would soon regret. The Battle of the Denmark Strait and the fall of HMS Hood. At 05:45 on May 24, 1941, German lookouts aboard Bismarck spotted smoke on the horizon. It was the battlecruiser HMS Hood and the battleship HMS Prince of Wales. Lowering his binoculars, Admiral Lutyens ordered immediate battle stations. 7 minutes later, from a range of nearly 28,000 yards, Hood opened fire. Prince of Wales followed 1 minute later. The British ships, commanded by Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, initially targeted different vessels, with Hood mistakenly focusing on Prince Eugen instead of Bismarck. As Bismarck began to return fire, the British ships charged head-on, a tactic that masked their rear turrets and limited them to only their forward guns. The Germans, however, were positioned broadside, able to unleash full salvos from all main turrets. Vice Admiral Holland ordered a turn to port, desperate to bring Hood's aft guns into the action. It was a fatal move. As the great ship turned, she exposed her flank. Now focusing all fire on Hood, Prince Eugen drew first blood, an 8-inch shell igniting a fire amidships. Finally, after several attempts, with the range now locked, Bismarck's main battery of 8 15-inch guns fired a rapid salvo at Hood, while her secondary 5.9-inch guns simultaneously engaged Prince of Wales. Sensing the British confusion, Lutyens ordered his force to concentrate fire. With the range now locked, Bismarck's main battery fired a full salvo at Hood. At exactly 0600 hours, just as Hood began her second turn, an armor-piercing shell from Bismarck plunged through her deck, penetrating deep into the aft magazine. Instantly, the ship broke apart between the mainmast and the funnel. Within 8 minutes of the first shot, Hood was gone, taking 1,416 sailors down with her. For many families, it was a wound that never healed. One observer recounted that his uncle had perished on the Hood. Another shared the story of his grandfather, who had served on the ship for years, but was fortuitously transferred just before the ill-fated voyage. He knew so many men who went down with the ship that the grief was so profound, he never spoke of it. With Hood sunk, Bismarck shifted her full attention to Prince of Wales. The British ship scored a few hits, one flooding a generator room, another passing through the bow, but she was hopelessly outgunned. When a shell from Bismarck smashed into the bridge, she had no choice but to turn away. Although Captain Lindemann urged a pursuit, Lutyens refused. In just 21 minutes, Bismarck had fired nearly 100 shells. But after taking 3 hits, damage to her hull was worsening, and as she turned south at a reduced speed, a long slick of oil trailed behind her. Sink the Bismarck, a transatlantic manhunt. Following their major victory, Bismarck escaped into the open ocean and soon set a course for German-occupied Brest in France. In London, Churchill received the report and issued a simple command: sink the Bismarck. Within hours, every available ship was diverted for the chase. The home fleet came about at maximum speed, still 400 miles away, but steaming full ahead to intercept. The battleship Rodney abandoned her convoy escort and altered course. 6 battleships and battlecruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers were all following Bismarck's oil trail.
As night fell on May 24th, hours later, through driving rain and a darkening sky, Swordfish torpedo bombers from the carrier Victorious found their target. And then, the defining moment of the hunt arrived, not from 16-inch guns, but from something that looked like a relic of the past. The fairy Swordfish biplanes, affectionately known by their pilots as string bags, were slow, obsolete machines made of canvas and wire. But these flying museums were about to change naval history. Under the leadership of Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond, the antiquated biplanes dived through a wall of intense anti-aircraft fire. One torpedo found its mark, detonating against Bismarck's armor belt. The blow shook the massive ship, but caused only minimal damage. In the night, Bismarck slipped away to the south, altering course toward France, while the Royal Navy steamed northeast, still believing she was heading for Norway. Deciding to break radio silence, Admiral Lutyens transmitted a detailed report of their position to Berlin, and British listening stations intercepted it immediately. As she held steady at 21 knots, her damaged bow was taking on water asymmetrically, forcing her to burn fuel unevenly just to maintain trim. Miles away, British forces faced a crisis of their own. Prince of Wales, Repulse, Victorious, and 4 cruisers broke off the hunt, their fuel bunkers nearly empty. From Gibraltar, a second strike group surged north. Force H, commanded by Admiral James Somerville and built around the carrier Ark Royal and the battlecruiser Renown, was racing to intercept Bismarck before she could reach the safety of French ports and the protection of the Luftwaffe. At 10:30 hours on May 26th, through breaking clouds and hazy air, a Catalina flying boat spotted Bismarck and her trailing oil. Within minutes, Swordfish from Ark Royal confirmed the sighting. Now Bismarck, still 690 miles from the French coast, was about to face the full weight of British naval power converging from all directions. Cornered, and the final strike. Through pouring rain and rough seas on the afternoon of May 26th, HMS Ark Royal launched 15 Swordfish biplanes. However, the pilots were not warned that a Royal Navy asset, HMS Sheffield, had been sent ahead to shadow Bismarck. They mistook the British cruiser for their target and sent magnetic torpedoes racing toward her, all of which either exploded on contact with the sea or missed entirely. Bismarck continued through the rising swell, her crew unaware that the next wave of Swordfish was already airborne, this time carrying contact detonators. Just after 2000 hours, the Swordfish found Sheffield again and took their vector, rain hammering against their wings as radar flickered and visibility dropped to near zero. At 2047 hours, they finally spotted Bismarck, and her anti-aircraft guns opened fire immediately. One torpedo struck amidships with little effect, but then another found its mark near the stern, jamming the rudder. The world's most modern war machine had been crippled by a weapon from a bygone era. It was an iconic moment, signaling the end of the battleship age and the rise of air power at sea. Suddenly, the ship that had terrorized the North Atlantic could no longer steer her own course. Bismarck limped through the waves as British forces closed in from all sides. Admiral Tovey, monitoring reports, swung his forces south, aiming to intercept at dawn when the rising sun would silhouette Bismarck as a perfect target. Aboard Bismarck, damage control teams worked in gale force winds, trying to free the jammed rudder.
Waves crashed over the decks as the ship attempted to steer crudely by adjusting propeller speeds. But it was not enough. The storm and the damage were forcing Bismarck into a slow arc, sweeping directly toward the oncoming British fleet. At 23:40 hours, Admiral Lutyens transmitted his final message to German headquarters. "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." The final 106 minutes. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, with grey skies, rough seas, and a strong northwesterly wind, Admiral Tovey delayed the attack, waiting for full daylight to perfectly silhouette his target. In the mist, just before 08:45, the heavy cruiser HMS Norfolk was the first to stumble upon the battered Bismarck, limping in a circle. Norfolk immediately signaled the rest of the fleet, "Enemy in sight." Moments later, lookouts aboard the fleet flagship HMS King George V spotted her silhouette just 25,000 yards away. The trap was sprung. The battleship HMS Rodney, an older vessel but armed with massive 16-inch guns, opened fire first at 08:47. The flagship followed seconds later. Bismarck, unable to steer and tossed by the violent seas, valiantly returned fire. But her salvos went wide, straddling Rodney, but failing to score a hit. The final brutal reckoning had begun. Just after 0900 hours, with the range closing, Rodney's shells began to find their mark. One 16-inch shell smashed directly into Bismarck's forward superstructure, obliterating the main fire control director and wiping out nearly everyone inside, including most of her senior officers. Almost simultaneously, another hit knocked out the forward main gun turrets. In an instant, Bismarck was half blind and half disarmed. Command fell to the aft fire control post, but it too was silenced within minutes. With the command structure collapsing, First Officer Hans Oehls, now the senior surviving officer, realized the ship was lost. He rushed from compartment to compartment, shouting the final orders: "Open the watertight doors, prepare demolition charges, abandon ship." The crew began the process of scuttling their own vessel. But it was too late for Oehls. A shell from King George V tore through the armor belt and exploded in the aft canteen, killing him and over 100 other men gathered there. By 1000 hours, Bismarck was a burning, helpless wreck, her guns silenced, listing heavily to port. The British battleships closed to point-blank range, pouring thousands of shells into the dying giant. In an act almost unheard of in modern naval combat, HMS Rodney fired its torpedoes at the German ship, one of the very few instances in history of a battleship torpedoing another. By 10:20 hours, running critically low on fuel, Admiral Tovey ordered his battleships to withdraw. The heavy cruiser HMS Dorsetshire was sent in to deliver the coup de grace. When a final torpedo struck Bismarck's flooded port side at 10:35 hours, she began to capsize. 5 minutes later, at 10:40 hours, the pride of the German Navy rolled over and disappeared beneath the waves. In a battle lasting 106 minutes, the Royal Navy had fired over 2,800 shells, scoring hundreds of hits. The battle was over, but the human tragedy was just beginning. HMS Dorsetshire and HMS Maori lingered, pulling 110 German survivors from the freezing Atlantic. Hundreds more were still in the water. But then, a U-boat alarm sounded. Fearing an attack, The British ships were forced to abandon the rescue, leaving hundreds of men to their fate. But even in that moment of brutal necessity, humanity shone through. Captain Benjamin Martin of HMS Dorsetshire had risked his ship to save as many as he could. On board his vessel, a midshipman named Joe Brooks, unable to bear the sight of men dying in the oil-slicked water, jumped into the sea himself to help pull them aboard. An act he later explained with a single word: humanity. Of Bismarck's crew of over 2,200 men, only 114 would survive the sinking and the cold Atlantic waters. Aftermath and legacy. As Bismarck sank beneath the Atlantic, the German Air Force remained grounded by severe weather, utterly unable to protect her. The loss shook Germany, as the nation's most powerful battleship had survived less than 9 days at sea. Even Prime Minister Churchill later reflected on the significance of the victory, stating, "The sinking of the Bismarck has had a beneficial effect upon the whole course of the war at sea." And the lesson went deeper than that. The Bismarck event proved a harsh truth. The era where massive battleships ruled the oceans was over. A ship worth millions of marks could be neutralized by an obsolete biplane. This was precisely why her sister ship, Tirpitz, spent most of the remainder of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords. The death of Bismarck was also the death of a doctrine of warfare. Surface operations were frozen, and major warships were kept in port, except for limited missions in northern waters. The days of the Kriegsmarine were numbered. The story of the hunt for Bismarck became a modern epic, retold in books, films, and even folk songs. For many, the melody of Johnny Horton's song "Sink the Bismarck" became a part of childhood memory. A reminder of a great hunt at sea and the courage of those who took part. Forged to be unrivaled, they confronted the foe, weathered tragedy, and tasted triumph. Etched into history by the valor of their crews, these are the vessels worthy to be called naval legends. In this episode, we chronicle the Yamato, the life and death of a legendary battleship. By the spring of 1945, it was evident that only a miracle could deliver Japan from total ruin in the Second World War. The land of the rising sun had lost nearly its entire naval and air prowess, while American forces were already breaching the home islands. On the morning of April 6th, the fabled Japanese battleship Yamato sorted for her final engagement. A dying empire placed its last hope upon this steel leviathan, the largest and most formidable dreadnought of her age. Operation Tengo, or Heaven No. 1, this Pacific offensive was a perilous undertaking. Yet faith in the Yamato bordered on the religious. Her people believed Providence itself sailed with her. The birth of a Titan. The saga of the Yamato began a decade before her legendary final voyage. In October 1935, Japanese engineers sketched the initial drafts of this celebrated naval colossus. Unlike the Americans, whose vessels were constrained by the width of the Panama Canal, the Japanese were unfettered, free to construct ships of immense tonnage and arm them with maximum lethality. Imperial designers aimed to forge battleships potent enough to outclass every existing foreign rival, and any vessel likely to be laid down in the years to come. The stage for this production was the Kure Naval Arsenal. These shipyards witnessed the genesis of the Yamato. Her keel was laid in 1937, and she was commissioned in 1941.
The Yamato was the heaviest battleship ever to float. Her construction commanded a staggering 130 million yen. A fortune which, by modern reckoning, rivaled the national budget of a small state. Many in Japan would later equate the monumental effort and expense of the Yamato project to the American undertaking of the Manhattan Project. Initially, the Empire planned a fleet of 4 Yamato-class vessels. However, with the Pacific War raging, construction halted after the second, the Musashi. The third, Shinano, was converted into an aircraft carrier, and the fourth was never realized. Yamato, an ancient name for Japan, signifies great harmony. Her creation was shrouded in absolute secrecy. High sisal mats shielded the dry dock. Engineers swore solemn oaths, and workers underwent rigorous identification. The imperial shipbuilders indeed had a colossal secret to conceal. Yet, within this clandestine construction, a fatal technical flaw was unwittingly sown. As astute observers note, the Yamato was assembled largely by traditional riveting, whereas the US Navy had already advanced to superior arc welding technology. Under torpedo impact, these riveted seams were prone to bursting, accelerating flooding and rendering her hull structure far more vulnerable than her contemporary adversaries. Anatomy of a superfortress. Full load displacement, 72,808 tons. Length, 862 feet. Beam, 127 feet. Draft, 35 feet. Her primary armament boasted 3 turrets, each housing 3 Type 94 massive 18.1-inch guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship. The secondary battery comprised 2 turrets, each mounting triple Type 3 guns of 6.1-inch guns. Yet the point of fiercest contention remains her defensive systems. Anti-aircraft defenses consisted of 12 twin-mount 5-inch dual-purpose guns, alongside 50 triple-barrel and 2 single-barrel Type 96 25mm autocannons. Though appearing formidable, combat reality proved otherwise. Historians and strategists concur that Yamato's air defense was woefully inadequate. The 25mm guns vibrated violently, small magazines demanded ceaseless reloading, and critically, their tracking systems could not keep pace with modern American aircraft. The Yamato resembled a samurai wielding the world's sharpest blade against a swarm of hornets. No matter the sword's edge, it cannot strike the bee. Her armor belt ranged from 11 to 16 inches. Main turrets boasted 7 to 25 inches. The conning tower, 300 to 500 millimeters. Propulsion relied on 4 Campon turbines and 12 Campon row boilers, generating 154,000 shaft horsepower for a top speed exceeding 27 knots. The defining features of the Yamato were her main batteries, 460mm cannons capable of hurling projectiles weighing nearly 3,200 pounds, launching shells at 2,600 feet per second, nearly 3 times the speed of sound. A single turret assembly weighed 3,000 tons and accommodated a crew of over 150 men. These massive guns were guided by a complex fire control system, integrating directors, rangefinders, and electromechanical computers. It was state-of-the-art for its time. The absence of fire control radar for surface engagement was offset by the exceptional grouping of her salvos. The ship's secondary battery featured 2 turrets of triple 155mm guns,
Possessing superb ballistics, they could pierce the armor of a standard cruiser. Upon commissioning, Yamato carried 6 twin 127mm mounts for long-range engagement, plus short-range defense of 8 triple 25mm guns, an arsenal continually reinforced throughout the war. However, a fatal disparity existed between the effective ranges of the 127mm and 25mm guns. If enemy aircraft entered this dead zone, no weapon could effectively intercept them. This was the tragedy of her engineering. The Japanese had forged a monster perfect for the obsolete era of ship-to-ship duels. Weapon systems had grown to literal monstrosities. Japan built a super-battleship akin to 10 or 15 others combined. Yet, as a bitter adage suggests, the greater the power, the more exposed the weakness. Ultimately, the concept proved futile. You may construct a Yamato-class battleship, yet she remains doomed when facing superior American battle lines, or worse, hundreds of diminutive aircraft. The 3 Great Follies. Yamato entered service in late 1941. During her maiden operation, the Battle of Midway, she served as the flagship of the combined fleet. Yet throughout the engagement, she fired no shots in anger, functioning solely as a floating command center. Why was such a titan withheld from the fray? Critics argue Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was overly cautious, guarding Yamato like a crown jewel too precious to risk. The fleet-in-being strategy. The idea of keeping a powerful ship in reserve just to threaten the enemy effectively tethered her to port, reducing her to a hollow symbol rather than an instrument of war. Consequently, disillusionment spread among the crews. A cynical adage circulated through the ranks, claiming the world's 3 most useless objects were the Great Wall of China, the Pyramids of Egypt, and the battleship Yamato. The derisive moniker Hotel Yamato was born of this resentment. While destroyer crews faced starvation and death on the picket lines, Yamato's officers enjoyed air conditioning and fine dining in safety. It was a bitter paradox for a vessel forged to dominate the high seas. As one Western historian surmised, Yamato was the right ship for the wrong war. She was a masterpiece of naval engineering, yet rendered obsolete the very moment she struck the water. Not until the autumn of 1944 did the Imperial giant see true combat. Alongside her sister, Musashi, Yamato engaged American landing forces off Leyte. Sustaining only minor damage, she displayed her might, briefly reclaiming her reputation as an unsinkable juggernaut. However, the strategic reality of the Pacific theater had irrevocably shifted. The evolution of military technology follows a philosophical trajectory. When developing new weaponry, nations invariably seek to escalate specifications: larger calibers, impenetrable armor. Eventually, this linear pursuit reaches a technological cul-de-sac. The paradigm shift arrived with the aircraft carrier, and later, the guided missile. Yamato represented the absolute zenith of the battleship era. She was not a step forward in evolution, but rather the magnificent final summit of a dying breed. Operation Tengo, a voyage of no return. By 1945, the Second World War had besieged the Japanese home islands. The Combined Fleet Command issued a decree steeped in Bushido. The Yamato, escorted by a light cruiser and 8 destroyers, was to defend Okinawa, halting the American advance or fighting until a glorious end. In stark terms, this was a suicide mission. On paper, the Yamato was issued fuel sufficient only for a one-way passage. The Japanese harbored no intention for her return. Heeding this command, on April 6, 1945, the legendary Japanese battleship cast off to wage her final battle. The United States dispatched Task Force 58 to intercept the combined fleet's flagship. The Americans would not squander the opportunity to annihilate the ultimate symbol of Japanese naval might. As early as 10 a.m., the Vanguard squadrons launched from 5 fleet carriers and 4 light carriers, roughly 300 nautical miles from the Yamato. In total, 227 aircraft joined the hunt to crush the Japanese force. The heavens darkened with American wings. A survivor later recounted that they descended like a swarm of locusts, striking from every azimuth. With no air cover, the Yamato fought back in solitary desperation. The engagement commenced at 12:34. 4 aerial bombs struck home, disabling a 127mm gun mount and several autocannons. Within 20 minutes, 2 additional bombs battered the battleship, and a torpedo slammed into her port side. Her riveted seams began to burst under the concussive stress of repeated blasts. In retaliation, Yamato unleashed her anti-aircraft batteries. At 14:02, the Americans launched their final assault on the wounded, yet still defiant vessel. It was a merciless execution. 4 torpedoes obliterated the central damage control station. The Yamato went dead in the water, listing ever more critically to port. And as the Leviathan capsized, a cataclysmic explosion tore her apart. This remains one of naval history's most harrowing images. As the hull overturned, the 3,000-ton main turrets tore free from their mountings, crushing the superstructure. Internal temperatures spiked uncontrollably, igniting the massive magazines. The blast erupted into a mushroom cloud, soaring 20,000 feet high, resembling a miniature nuclear detonation, visible from the Japanese mainland over 100 miles away. The shockwave was of such ferocity that historical records confirm it shredded and downed at least 6 American aircraft flying in proximity. Even in her death throes, the Yamato dragged her enemies down to hell with her. The fall of a legend and an immortal legacy. The pride and hope of the Imperial fleet slipped beneath the waves. Along with the vessel, 3,000 crewmen perished, including the commanders of both the task force and the ship herself. To the Japanese, Yamato remains an emblem of national strength, having fallen in battle like a true samurai. The city where this legendary dreadnought was forged opened a museum, centered around a 26-meter scale model of the ship. The Kure City Maritime History and Science Museum was established a decade ago to preserve the city's rich naval heritage. Today it is simply renowned as the Yamato Museum. Yet Yamato's legacy resides not merely in museums or the deep abyss. It was reincarnated in popular culture, most notably through the classic anime Space Battleship Yamato. In the imagination of the post-war generation, her wreckage was raised, refitted as a starship, and launched to save the Earth from extinction. This is how Japan heals the scars of the past, transmuting a failed weapon of war into a beacon of hope,
and a guardian of future peace. The cataclysmic explosion that sealed Yamato's fate resulted from the detonation of her main magazines. However, intense debate surrounds the catalyst of that terrible blast. The answer likely lies buried beneath the ocean. To this day, researchers have yet to salvage the remnants of the super-battleship. The truth remains that Yamato possessed fatal flaws. Like her sister Musashi, this battleship was vanquished by aerial assault. The primary cause was the vessel's fundamental inability to withstand concentrated air attacks. Yamato endures as the largest and most powerful battleship in history. To every student of naval warfare, she embodies martial prowess. Born to terrorize and crush the enemy, this formidable steel titan dignified her name even in defeat. The engineering precision that built Yamato didn't vanish after the war. It shifted from weapons of destruction to the industrial innovations that rebuilt modern Japan. She represents the zenith of capital ship design, a summit that will likely never be scaled again. In that sense, Yamato shall forever remain a symbol and a legend.
Vietnam, 1968. Near the demilitarized zone. A Marine platoon is ambushed. Outnumbered, their backs to the sea. All escape routes are cut off. They call for air support. None available. They call for ground artillery. Silence. Desperation sets in. And then, through the static, a voice comes over the radio. Calm. Authoritative. Almost otherworldly. They look out to sea, but see nothing. Only an empty horizon. But 25 miles away, the most powerful steel monster in the world, a relic of the Second World War, had just awoken to answer their call. By the late 1960s, the art of war had completely changed. This was the age of supersonic jets, guided missiles, and helicopter air cavalry. But in Vietnam, the United States was paying a heavy price. The bombing campaign over North Vietnam was meeting a dense and sophisticated air defense system. Loss rates for aircraft and pilots were rising to alarming levels. At the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara needed a solution. A powerful, reliable, all-weather fire support platform that didn't risk pilots' lives. His answer was a controversial turn, back in time. Deep in the Naval Reserve Fleet, a giant was sleeping. The USS New Jersey. A relic of World War II. Many in the modern Navy scoffed at the idea. Bringing a dinosaur to a modern battlefield? It was deemed too big, too obsolete, and too expensive to operate. But the New Jersey possessed something no modern warship had. A belt of steel armor nearly 20 inches thick and 9 16-inch guns. McNamara was betting on this RAW power. After a rapid modernization process, in April 1968, the USS New Jersey was recommissioned. It became the only active battleship in the entire world. A living paradox. A World War II gladiator, armed with colossal guns, was heading into a modern guerrilla war. the most expensive experiment in naval history had begun. And it was about to redefine the concept of fire support. September 1968. The USS New Jersey arrives on the gun line. Its mission: to be the most powerful floating fortress in the world. And that power originated here. 9 16-inch or 406mm Mark 7 guns. Each turret weighed more than a modern destroyer, protected by nearly 20 inches of armor plating. These massive guns could fire armor-piercing shells weighing up to 2,700 pounds. To put it simply, the New Jersey was capable of hurling an object with the same weight as a Volkswagen Beetle. And it could hurl those cars a distance of nearly 25 miles. At the peak of their trajectory, the shells flew more than 3 times the height of Mount Everest, reaching supersonic speeds as they plunged toward the target. The destructive power was apocalyptic. A single high-explosive shell could blast a crater 50 feet deep and clear an area the size of a football field. It could turn dense jungle into a helicopter landing zone instantly. But the numbers cannot fully describe the true power of the New Jersey. It had to be experienced with the senses. When it fired at night, its flash turned night into day in an instant. The shockwave traveled across the ocean, powerful enough to suck the air out of your lungs if you stood too close. But the most haunting thing for the soldiers on the ground was the sound of the shells passing overhead. Because they moved faster than sound, the shell arrived before its own report. It created a ferocious, tearing roar that ripped the air apart. Veterans describe it as a freight train roaring right next to you, or a dump truck cutting through the air. It was an unnatural experience, inverting the sequence of sound and destruction. A terrifying psychological event. Raw power would be meaningless without accuracy. How could the New Jersey fire so precisely from such a great distance? The answer lay deep inside the ship, in main battery plot. This was the New Jersey's brain. And it was not digital. At the center of the room was the Mark 8 Rangekeeper analog computer, a multi-ton mechanical marvel of thousands of gears and differentials. It constantly solved complex ballistic equations, accounting for dozens of variables. The ship's own speed and course, wind speed, air density, and the temperature of the propellant. And at extreme ranges, they even had to account for the curvature of the Earth and the Coriolis effect, the rotation of our planet. Without this adjustment, a shell could miss its target by hundreds of yards. This process depended on eyes on the battlefield. The forward observers. They identified the target and sent the coordinates. One day, a fire mission came in from over 20 miles away. The target? A single structure on a hilltop. They fired the first round to calibrate. The spotter radioed back. Enemy have just entered the structure.
Right 50 yards, add 100 yards. The technicians in main battery plot quickly input the data. The massive turret shifted by a fraction of a degree and fired. 90 seconds later, the observer came back on the line, his voice filled with astonishment. "I don't know if you got 'em, but the hilltop is gone." That was the ability to reshape the terrain on demand, from over the horizon. A lethal combination of peak mechanical engineering and human skill. This combination of destructive power and extraordinary precision created a legend in the fields of Vietnam. The New Jersey had two faces.
For the soldiers on the ground, it was the guardian angel. When a unit was pinned down, outnumbered, and facing annihilation, that voice on the radio, "This is the New Jersey," was the sound of salvation. They sent their coordinates, and minutes later, they heard that sound. The air-tearing roar of the freight train. Then the ground would shake violently. The enemy's position would be turned into a hell on earth. The attack would cease instantly. For those soldiers, Big J was the answer to their prayers. It was the voice of God, delivering salvation by gunfire. But for their enemy, it was the embodiment of inescapable destruction. They called it the Black Dragon. The shriek of its shells and their terrifying explosive force became a source of deep psychological trauma. The mere presence of the New Jersey severely degraded enemy morale. This psychological power was fully exploited. One anecdote tells of a leaflet dropped after a barrage. "You have just been shelled by the world's most powerful battleship. If you do not surrender in 10 minutes, you will receive another volley." Many enemy soldiers surrendered. The threat of total annihilation had broken their will to fight. During its short but incredibly intense tour in Vietnam, from September 1968 to April 1969, the New Jersey operated almost non-stop. It fired a colossal amount of ordnance. 5,688 16-inch shells and nearly 15,000 5-inch shells. This was more ammunition than it had fired in both the Second World War and the Korean War, combined. An unprecedented display of firepower. But this display came at a steep price. The cost of operating the New Jersey was enormous. As the Nixon administration sought to cut defense spending and shift strategy, the giant's fate was sealed. In December 1969, the USS New Jersey was decommissioned for a second time. The thunder over the South China Sea fell silent. The legacy of the New Jersey in Vietnam is complex. Strategically, its presence did not change the final outcome of the war. It was a situational weapon, limited by geography. But tactically, and more importantly in human terms, its impact was immeasurable.
it saved countless lives. Although the ship would go on to serve again in the 1980s, its time in Vietnam remains the most intense and paradoxical chapter of its career. It was the last stand of the age of the gun against the age of the missile. Proof that even in an era of high technology, raw, overwhelming, and precise firepower still held an irreplaceable value. The USS New Jersey had arrived in Vietnam as an obsolete relic and left as a legend. A legend born from the desperate needs of soldiers and answered by the thunder of the world's most powerful battleship. The story of the USS New Jersey is a testament to the endurance of technology and human courage. What aspect of Big J's firepower impressed you the most? And if you or a loved one have stories about this ship, please share them in the comments below. And so you don't miss more in-depth analysis of military history and the technology of war, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Thank you for watching. Your vision is 0. The darkness is so thick you can feel it. The water here isn't clear. It's a viscous slurry of fuel oil, mud, and the chaos of war. You are weighed down by nearly 200 pounds of equipment. You must work entirely by feel, navigating a maze of sharp metal, completely blind. And somewhere in the dark, invisible killers are waiting. Poison gas, and the risk of explosion. Welcome to the most dangerous job of World War II, the Pearl Harbor salvage operation. December 8th, 1941. Pearl Harbor is no longer a naval base. It is a giant steel graveyard. The backbone of the US Pacific Fleet has been broken. To many, these giants were dead. They should be left as monuments to the tragedy. But strategically, this was a disaster of incalculable proportions. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the fleet's new commander, understood a harsh reality of wartime logistics. Building a new fleet would take years. Time was something America did not have. They could not wait. Nimitz gives the order: do the impossible. Resurrect the dead ships. If this operation failed, the war in the Pacific could be over before it truly began. The scale of this task was unprecedented in the history of marine engineering. A total of 21 ships needed to be dealt with. Engineers categorized the wrecks into priority groups. The more likely damaged ships, like the Maryland, could be repaired relatively quickly. But the great challenges lay with the giants that were completely submerged: the West Virginia and the California. Sunk, flooded, but thankfully, they remained upright. And then there was the Oklahoma, completely capsized, a literal engineering nightmare. But scale wasn't the only problem. The ships were massive ticking time bombs. Munitions magazines were still filled with explosives, and millions of gallons of fuel oil remained inside, turning the harbor into a fire trap. A single spark could trigger a second catastrophe. To perform this miracle, a unique army was assembled. Engineers, welders, carpenters, and civilian specialists, working around the clock. Commanding this massive operation was Captain Homer N. Wallin, a brilliant naval architect. Wallin understood this mission demanded unheard-of technical innovation, and he needed men willing to walk into hell. The salvage divers, men who had to perform complex mechanical jobs in the most extreme conditions known to man. Initial surveys began almost immediately. Divers made their first descents into the darkness to assess the true damage within. What they discovered was worse than anyone had imagined. The explosions had created a labyrinth of jagged metal. The internal environment was utterly toxic. They realized that standard salvage methods would be completely useless here. They would have to rewrite the entire book on rescue engineering right on the spot. The first step to resurrecting a ship is to understand its wounds, and that meant going inside. This work was not for the faint of heart. The Mark V diving suit was a primitive life support machine, heavy, cumbersome, and it completely isolated the diver. Inside the ships was a world of nightmares. The explosions had twisted the compartments into mazes of contorted steel. Everything was coated in a thick layer of oil, and they had to work completely blind. But the greatest threat was what they could not see. In the sealed, oxygen-deprived environment, the decomposition of organic matter had created a silent killer. Hydrogen sulfide gas, H2S, extremely toxic and highly explosive. A single mistake in ventilation or a spark from a colliding metal tool could spell instant disaster for the entire salvage team. Every dive was a gamble with death. Consider the USS West Virginia. She was hit by at least 7 torpedoes. Her hull was torn open. To refloat the ship, these wounds had to be sealed. But how do you measure and design a patch for a hole dozens of yards long, deep in the mud, in total darkness? This was the pinnacle of tactile engineering. The divers had to use thin wooden battens to create a template of the rupture, inch by inch, relaying the information to the surface by telephone. They became the eyes of the engineers. Based on this raw data, the engineers under Captain Wallin's command designed enormous custom patches, which would become known as the Wallin patch. These were complex structures, fabricated from heavy timber and reinforced steel, weighing many tons. Installing them was a monumental feat. The divers had to guide these massive sections into place, tightening hundreds of bolts by hand, ensuring a perfect watertight seal, under nearly impossible conditions. However, for the West Virginia and California, conventional patches were not enough. The ships were too heavily damaged and sat too deep. Their main decks were completely underwater. The engineering team devised a bold solution, a technique normally used in bridge construction, the cofferdam. They decided to build a massive wooden wall around the entire perimeter of the ship, extending from the hull to above the water's surface. In essence, they were building a dam around a sunken battleship. This was a colossal undertaking. Divers had to clean the hull, then guide massive timbers, dozens of feet long, into position. Each timber had to be precisely cut to match the curvature of the hull and sealed with rubber, canvas, and even concrete. When completed, the cofferdam was an engineering marvel. A wooden fortress surrounding a steel citadel, ready for the next phase. pumping out millions of gallons of water. With the cofferdams in place, the battle to de-water began. Huge pumps ran day and night. Slowly, the water level inside the dam began to drop. But as the water receded, oxygen rushed in, creating an extremely hazardous environment. The risk of explosion from the accumulated H2S gas was at its peak. And as the ship's compartments were gradually exposed, the salvage team confronted the grimmest reality of their work. The environment inside was a catastrophe. Sophisticated machinery, electrical systems, and weapons had been submerged in a corrosive mixture of salt water and oil for months. Everything had to be cleaned by hand. More importantly, they had to perform a sacred yet heartbreaking duty: recovering the remains of their fallen comrades. The psychological toll of this work was immeasurable. Many men worked to the point of complete exhaustion, haunted by what they had witnessed. This was the lowest point of their war. Meanwhile, an entirely different engineering challenge was underway at the wreck of the USS Oklahoma. Completely capsized, she could not be salvaged with a cofferdam. The solution was a technique called parbuckling. This would be the first time it was ever attempted on the scale of a 35,000-ton battleship. Engineers constructed a system of 21 massive electric winches on Ford Island. Miles of steel cable were deployed. The cables were attached to special brackets on the hull. For months, these winches would slowly, inch by inch, pull the ship back to an upright position. It was an operation of extreme tension. The calculations of gravity and stress had to be perfect. Finally, after a monumental effort, the Oklahoma was righted from its watery grave, a spectacular victory of physics and applied engineering. Back on the West Virginia, May 1942, after nearly 6 months of relentless work, the moment of truth had arrived. The pumps were drawing out the last gallons of water. The massive cofferdam structure groaned under the immense hydrostatic pressure. If a single section of the dam failed, or if the hull became unstable, the entire operation could be lost in seconds. All eyes were on the scarred battleship. Would she rise? May 17, 1942. 6 months after the tragedy. A tense silence fell over the USS West Virginia. And then it happened. With a groan of tortured metal and a rush of cascading water, the 33,000-ton warship began to rise. It wasn't fast. It was a slow, agonizing process as the West Virginia freed herself from the thick mud that had held her for so long. Across the harbor, sirens blared and cheers erupted. This wasn't just an engineering victory. It was an almost spiritual moment. WV was alive. A tangible symbol of American resilience rising from the very mud of defeat. One by one, the Ghost Fleet returned from the dead. Even the Oklahoma, though too damaged to return to the fight, her successful righting remains one of the greatest maritime engineering achievements of all time. But refloating the ships was only half the battle. They had to be reborn. Towed to the US West Coast, the West Virginia and her sister ships underwent a complete metamorphosis. They were fitted with state-of-the-art radar, powerful anti-aircraft systems,
and entirely new superstructures. They returned to the war, stronger than they had ever been. The strategic impact was undeniable. In a moment of supreme irony, it was these same ships, led by the West Virginia, that annihilated a Japanese fleet at the Battle of Surigao Strait, completing their revenge for Pearl Harbor. The Pearl Harbor salvage operation remains the largest maritime rescue in history, requiring over 20,000 hours of diving in hellish conditions and 5 million man-hours of labor. Wars are often remembered for their battles and their generals, but at Pearl Harbor, the most crucial battle was fought by anonymous men in heavy diving suits. These engineers, carpenters, and divers never fired a shot. But their ingenuity and courage provided America with the one weapon it needed most: hope. The story of raising the Ghost Fleet is a testament to how human innovation, driven by absolute determination, can walk into hell and bring back a fleet. What do you think is the most incredible feat of military engineering in history? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to discover more extraordinary behind-the-scenes stories from history. In the illustrious annals of the world's navies, there exist vessels forged not merely from steel, but elevated into enduring symbols of entire nations. Their voyages mirror the indomitable will, profound tragedies, and resilient resurgence of their people. The saga of the USS West Virginia stands as such an epic anthem. From a technological marvel that ruled the vast oceans to a victim of one of the most harrowing dawns in history, and then reborn from the ashes to become a ruthless weapon of vengeance. This is the story of the ship that refused to be forgotten. The USS West Virginia stood as the crowning achievement of the Colorado-class battleships, a lineage forged to assert the United States' dominion over the seas in the early decades of the 20th century. This vessel was not merely an evolution. It embodied a revolutionary leap in American naval design philosophy of its era. Building upon the legacy of the preceding Tennessee class, the Colorado class forged a decisive leap forward. Unparalleled firepower. They were armed with 8 formidable 16-inch naval guns, a commanding superiority over the 14-inch calibers that defined their predecessors. This formidable power elevated West Virginia and her sister ships to a class all their own. Across the globe at that time, only a handful of rare adversaries, such as the Royal Navy's Nelson-class battleships, could rival their naval artillery might. The engineers concentrated not solely on offensive might, but placed equal emphasis on survivability. The armor plating was reinforced to greater thickness, especially around critical zones, such as the ammunition magazines and engine compartments. The strategic objective was unmistakable: to ensure these floating fortresses could withstand the devastating blows delivered by their equally formidable adversaries. Yet dissenting voices persisted. A faction within the Naval Command contended that retaining too many design elements from the Tennessee class was a cautious move, and that a more radical overhaul might have forged a truly groundbreaking class of battleships. However, the vision of the United States Navy was one of long-term strategic foresight. They pursued a doctrine centered on the synchronization of battleships. By maintaining uniformity in speed, armament, and armor protection, they optimized the entire logistical chain, training regimens, and fleet tactics, an indispensable factor for large-scale confrontations across the vast oceans. With a formidable frame akin to a fortress and devastating firepower, the USS West Virginia was launched on November 19, 1921.
and officially commissioned into the fleet on December 1st, 1923. She was a supreme, predatory beast, embodying the naval supremacy of her era. In the fragile years of peace that bridged two world wars, the West Virginia, affectionately dubbed Wee V by her crew, embarked upon a career marked by relentless vigor.
Immediately following her maiden voyage under the command of Captain Thomas J. Senn, the vessel encountered an unfortunate mishap. While navigating the Lynnhaven Channel, a mechanical failure caused her to run aground, a decidedly embarrassing predicament for both the captain and his crew. Fortune smiled upon them, however, as a subsequent investigation revealed the root cause to be erroneous chart data, thereby exonerating Captain Senn and his navigating officer. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, the Wee V emerged as a shining star in the grand-scale war games of the United States Navy, known officially as the fleet problems. These rigorous maneuvers spanned vast maritime theaters, from the icy waters off Alaska to the tropical seas of Panama, designed to test and refine emerging naval warfare doctrines. In 1925, under the masterful command of Captain Arthur Jappy Hepburn, the USS West Virginia triumphed over its rivals in a fierce gunnery competition, securing the coveted battle efficiency pennant. As the political atmosphere across Europe grew increasingly suffocating in the 1930s, the USS West Virginia began to receive a series of incremental upgrades. Its anti-aircraft defenses were enhanced, and catapults for seaplanes were installed. Yet a harsh reality loomed large. Comprehensive modernization plans for the ship had been drawn up, but the crushing financial burden, coupled with the emergence of a new generation of battleships, swifter and more formidable, forced these ambitions to be shelved. In the relentless race of naval technology, West Virginia and her sister ships of the same era began to confront the harsh reality of obsolescence. As newer warships were prioritized with cutting-edge advancements, the Wee V received only patchwork upgrades, gradually relegated to the rear lines. As the specter of a new world war loomed ever larger, the focus swiftly shifted toward urgently bolstering air defense capabilities. Yet fate had decreed that all these efforts would ultimately prove too little, too late. In the pre-dawn hours of December 7, 1941, the USS West Virginia lay anchored solemnly at Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor, positioned steadfastly beside her sister ship, the USS Tennessee. Suddenly the serene blue sky was rent asunder by the thunderous roar of a Japanese air squadron. A symphony of devastation had commenced. For Japanese strategists, battleships like the West Virginia represented the ultimate prize, second only to the elusive aircraft carriers. On that fateful day, with American carriers conspicuously absent, the full fury of the assault was unleashed upon the steel giants lying dormant in the harbor. West Virginia instantly became the epicenter of a furious onslaught. 7 torpedoes tore through her port side in rapid succession, while 2 heavy bombs rained down relentlessly upon her deck from the skies above. A bomb tore through the port side, igniting fierce infernos deep below decks. The second struck the aft turret. Though it failed to detonate, its sheer impact shattered one gun and destroyed 2 seaplanes perched on the deck. Fuel from these aircraft spilled forth, engulfing the vessel in a towering blaze, transforming it into a colossal torch of fire. Amidst the chaos, the steadfast courage of the naval servicemen shone brilliantly. Observing the ship dangerously listing, Lieutenant Claude V. Ricketts and his crew took decisive action. They deliberately flooded compartments on the starboard side to restore balance, a masterstroke that prevented the West Virginia from capsizing like the nearby USS Oklahoma.
even as the inferno raging from the USS Arizona spread, threatening to engulf everything in its path and forcing a desperate evacuation. Ricketts and his team stood resolute, steadfastly battling the relentless blaze. On the command deck, Captain Mervyn S. Benyon sustained grievous wounds from a bomb fragment. Despite his mortal injury, he steadfastly continued to lead and inspire his crew until his final breath. For this extraordinary valor, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States' most prestigious decoration.
At that very moment, Doris Miller, an African-American sailor trained solely as a mess attendant, fearlessly rushed to an anti-aircraft gun and unleashed a furious barrage against the diving Japanese planes. His heroic deed would later be honored with the Navy Cross. But all valiant efforts proved insufficient. Wounded and engulfed in a sea of flames, the West Virginia slowly sank into the shallow harbor waters. In total, 106 sailors were lost forever with the ship. In the days following the catastrophe, as chaos momentarily subsided, an even more harrowing truth was uncovered. Rescue teams began to hear it. Faint, desperate tapping echoing from within the submerged hull of the West Virginia and the other stricken vessels. A faint, solitary metallic tapping echoed through the silence. It paused. Then it resumed, beating out a rhythm steeped in despair. It was a signal from survivors trapped within air pockets deep beneath the water's surface. For the rescuers, it was a harrowing psychological torment. They knew their comrades were right there, shrouded in cold darkness, yet breaching the hull risked catastrophic explosions or sinking the vessel entirely, dooming the very souls they sought to save. The watch near the USS West Virginia became one of the most harrowing duties imaginable. In the stillness of the night, faint cries for help echoed from deep within the ship's hull, haunting the minds of all who heard them. A storm of fury and helplessness engulfed the entire naval base, igniting within the heart of America an unshakable resolve for vengeance. The tragedy of Pearl Harbor, which claimed 2,335 lives and echoed with the anguished cries from within the USS West Virginia, ignited an unquenchable thirst for vengeance across the United States. The Navy had been dealt a devastating blow, and the prospect of an immediate counterstrike seemed utterly unattainable. But America refused to surrender. From the ashes arose one of the greatest feats of engineering in World War II. This was not merely the repair of a ship. It was the salvage of an entire fleet's honor. For the salvage crews, it was a hellish ordeal. They toiled within a fetid stew of oil, water, and the remnants of fallen sailors. As a first-hand witness recounted, the acrid scent of burning fuel and the harrowing scenes rendered one nearly incapable of eating or drinking. Yet amidst that brutal crucible, the unyielding will of those nameless craftsmen triumphed. They forged the impossible, and on May 17, 1942, the Weavy rose again, reborn and ready to sail once more. During this harrowing ordeal, the bodies of approximately 70 sailors trapped within were discovered. Among the wreckage, a calendar was found. On it, red pencil marks crossed off the days until December 23rd. They had survived for 16 days in the cold darkness, sustaining themselves on emergency rations before finally succumbing to the cruel deprivation of air. West Virginia and California, the two battleships that bore the heaviest scars, were chosen to undergo a comprehensive modernization, a complete transformation. Weavy would finally receive the upgrades it had long been denied,
The hull was reinforced with additional torpedo belts, while the superstructure underwent a complete redesign. Most crucially, the vessel was outfitted with advanced airborne search radar and cutting-edge fire control systems, fully supplanting the outdated optical equipment. Its anti-aircraft arsenal was significantly bolstered with an array of new weaponry, decisively addressing the fatal vulnerability that had doomed it at Pearl Harbor.
By early July 1944, the USS West Virginia stood poised for sea trials. Nearly 3 years had passed since she was sunk, yet WV had been reborn, stronger, more resilient, and primed for vengeance. Deployed to the Pacific Theater at its most brutal juncture, the West Virginia had now become a formidable force to be reckoned with. If other warships fought for their homeland, their king, or their emperor, the West Virginia fought for a more primal cause: vengeance. Its fateful hour arrived during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, the largest naval engagement in the annals of human history. As a proud element of the 7th Fleet, West Virginia stood resolute, confronting the Japanese Central Force head-on within the treacherous Surigao Strait. Beneath the cloak of a dense, impenetrable night, guided by an advanced radar system, the WV emerged as the first battleship to unleash its devastating salvo. The relentless barrages of 16-inch shells, delivered with unerring precision, combined with the devastating torpedo strikes from American destroyers, forged an inferno upon the Japanese fleet. This battle bore a profound symbolic weight. The victims of Pearl Harbor, including the USS West Virginia, had now risen as avengers. In this very battle, confronting the Navy that had left it for dead, the WV exacted its long-awaited reckoning, landing a direct hit on the Japanese battleship Yamashiro and sealing its doom in the Surigao Strait. Following the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the USS West Virginia remained a pivotal force at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, unleashing its devastating naval artillery to clear the path for advancing ground troops. It also demonstrated its superior anti-aircraft prowess, successfully repelling numerous relentless assaults by the kamikaze Divine Wind squadrons. And then, in the final act of the war, USS West Virginia found its fullest redemption. On September 2, 1945, she lay anchored solemnly in Tokyo Bay, bearing witness to the moment the Empire of Japan formally signed the surrender documents aboard USS Missouri. Though the ceremony unfolded on Missouri's deck, for many, the presence of the WV there stood as the ultimate emblem of justice, a resolute affirmation that from the depths of betrayal's mire, America had risen to reclaim its due. In the aftermath of the war, in a decision many would later lament, the USS West Virginia was dismantled. It did not find eternal rest within the halls of a museum, yet its legacy never truly vanished. It endures still, alive in memory and spirit. It endures within the memories of families whose forebears once served aboard those ships. It lives on in humble yet sacred relics, a small notebook meticulously recording every shell fired in the Battle of Surigao Strait, a wartime diary guarded in secrecy for decades, or a worn military kit bag cherished by descendants. It lives on in the pride of an entire state, where the ship's components are enshrined as sacred relics. And it continues to patrol the vast oceans, as a fragment of its soul is passed on to the ballistic missile submarine USS West Virginia, SSBN 736. Though the ship was melted down, the spirit of WV remains immortal,